The fall of Mubarak paved the way for the Muslim Brotherhood's Mohamed Morsi to become Egypt's first democratically elected president in 2012. But a year later, mass protests took place against Morsi, and he was overthrown in a military coup led by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the current president. Sisi went on to become president while Morsi died in June this year while standing trial. Sisi has since strengthened his grip on power. Journalists have been arrested, including those working for this network. Rights groups accuse security forces of frequent abuses as they crack down on dissent. Let's now speak to Mohamad Elmasry, who's chair of the Media and Journalism Program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He's here in the studio with us. Thank you so much for coming in, Mohammed. So just how significant and important are the protests that we saw on Friday in Egypt across several cities, given everything that's happened in the country in the past, these past few years, and the violent crackdown that we've seen? How significant are these demonstrations?
I think they're very significant. Not in the sense that these protests are automatically going to lead to Sisi's forced removal. We don't know that yet. It's too early. But they're significant in the sense that this is a people, a Shab, that has gone through brutal repression. The Sisi regime killed hundreds of protesters in the streets in broad daylight on video in 2013. You mentioned some of that in your lead-up. So the fact that people are quite literally risking their lives by going out into the streets is highly significant. And I think it speaks to the extent to which people are fed up. They're fed up with Sisi's authoritarianism, and they're fed up with the economy.
The Egyptian government has crushed any protests ruthlessly in the past. We didn't see any of that on Friday, or perhaps we haven't seen it yet. What does this suggest to you, the fact that the protests were able to go on without the violence that we've seen in the past, the crackdown that we've seen from security forces in the past?
Well, it's probably too early to speculate. I don't want to get ahead of the game. I think we're likely to see a continuation of protests. We have to remember that the Mubarak regime employed different strategies. At times, they were relatively more calm. They allowed people to sort of vent their anger, and at times they cracked down. So we'll have to wait and see what the Sisi government does over the longer term, right? But one thing that some analysts have suggested as a possibility is that maybe the security apparatus isn't completely on board with Sisi. Maybe they almost want to let people vent out their anger. One thing that we know is that there is a fracture within the power structure in Egypt. This has played out over the last couple of years. Sisi has rivals from not only within the military but within the Interior Ministry, and so that's something that we'll have to keep.
So is it the case then, Mohamad Elmasry, that it's the internal fracture within the Egyptian military, within the regime, that could be the biggest threat to Sisi rather than the mass demonstrations?
Well, I think they both work hand in hand. I mean, it was the mass demonstrations that brought down Mubarak, but there needed to be people on the inside that were either fed up or that were willing to sacrifice Mubarak. Right. So we'll have to see at what point the military is willing to sacrifice Sisi.
Yeah, the demonstrations, of course, came after this self-exiled Egyptian businessman and actor Muhammad Ali accused President Sisi of corruption. He's a contractor, military contractor as well. How big of a threat is he? And, how much momentum is there for these demonstrations to continue?
Muhammad Ali is probably the most popular man in Egypt right now. Millions of people have watched the videos. His hashtags, anti-Sisi hashtags, have gone viral. This is something that is a legitimate threat to the Sisi government. If it wasn't a legitimate threat, then Sisi wouldn't have come out and responded directly to Muhammad Ali at last week's youth conference. That was unprecedented for Sisi to be put on the defensive like that inside of Egypt by an Egyptian.
Why have the allegations that Muhammad Ali has made about Sisi transfixed Egyptians so much? I mean, there have been allegations of corruption in the past against Sisi and the military. Yeah. Why this time is it resonating more with people, you think?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons, perhaps. I mean, on the one hand, he hasn't said anything that is super groundbreaking. I mean, Egyptians know that there's corruption inside the government apparatus, right? There's no surprises there. But the fact that he's an insider, that he worked with the military for about 15 years, the fact that he has intricate details, and also the fact that the economy is increasingly spiraling out of control for the average Egyptian. The average Egyptian has been completely lost in the dust. poverty is at about 33%, according to the Egyptian government. That is about a third of Egyptians live on just over $1 a day. If we use the more realistic figures by the World Bank, then we're talking more like 50 to 60% of Egyptians who are living in acute poverty. So people almost they were looking for some kind of a spark, and Muhammad Ali has given that to them.
It'll be interesting to see how the situation develops, of course. Thank you so much, Mohamad Elmasry from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera.